Egyptians living in the time between 2600 BCE and 330 BCE most likely lived near the Nile River. The Nile River was what provided sustenance for many of the citizens of ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt is most closely related with the Greeks to the north and the Nubians to the south, all of whom were enemies. According to records shown by Egyptologists, most of the periods that we know well today are separated into four distinct periods: the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, the New Kingdom, and the Ptolemy period, which will be at the end of this video. Monarchy, a system of government where the rules and leadership of a civilization are mandated by the head authority. Ancient Egyptian social classes were generally broken up into 5 different categories. At the top of ancient Egyptian society, the pharaoh had the role of overseeing society to make sure that it functioned properly. Egyptian priests were highly valued and were given high compensation for their time. Strict adherence to the rules were necessary for many priests, and they were required to shave their heads while also attending to the gods' and goddesses' temples as necessary. To be considered a noble in Egyptian society, you would either have to be related to a pharaoh, priest, scribe, doctor, in either family or friend-related circumstances. Many of the nobles were overseers of the land worked by peasants, and taxes from these lands were paid to the government in the form of crops, cattle, and other miscellaneous objects. Artisans were generally the working population, who consisted of skilled laborers who had specialties in trade, medicine, and other industries. At the bottom of ancient Egyptian society were the peasants and slaves. Although slaves and peasants were not treated as poorly as other societies at the time, they were often given hard labor and, in certain circumstances, cruel punishment. Peasants were often given the option to become or work as slaves if they had the inability to pay debts or had past crimes. Although it was not the most glamorous of lifestyles, poor peasants who needed food and shelter were often granted these wishes. The belief system of ancient Egyptians varied depending on the gods. Some of these gods included Isis, supporter of women, Osiris, god of the underworld, and Ra, the sun god. Once a pharaoh would die, he or she would become mummified and placed into gigantic erected monuments. In the rule of Akhenaten, or Amenhotep IV, the polytheistic beliefs were transcribed into monotheistic beliefs. In an action to create a new hybrid god called Amen-Ra, the religious belief diminished along with the pharaoh once he had died. Polytheism became reinstated and helped influence other core religions such as Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and Zoroastrianism later in time. The Pyramid of Giza, built for King Khufu nearly 4,000 years ago, is still one of the greatest architectural feats to this time, with its smooth surface and ageless decor. With mathematical and advanced astronomical-based knowledge, no one is for sure on how the pyramid was actually built. Papyrus is the earliest form of paper-like material, and was very much valuable in the ancient world. It was made from the stems and papyrus reed that grow in the Nile marshes by moistening and pounding the product until it became writing material. Egyptians were among the first to develop language in inscripted pictograms. Although it is not uncommon for past civilizations to have used pictograms, the Egyptians were one of the first to use it in a structured format. The meaning behind certain hieroglyphs have not been yet resolved. Towards the last couple of centuries, the Ptolemy period from 664 to 332 BC would mark the last period in ancient Egyptian civilization. But the last known civilization that conquered ancient Egypt were the Greeks. In 332 BC, Alexander the Great conquered Egypt and was eventually succeeded by the last Egyptian Greek queen, Cleopatra VII. Later colonization would be marked by a new millennia, and as an old one is left behind, a new one begins.